Hi there, my name is Conrad, and in this video I'm going to give you a really basic introduction to using expressions in Nuke. I'm aiming this video at folks who don't know anything about expressions at all. If you've done any expressions in Nuke before, this video might be a little too basic, but hopefully there are a few tips in there for you as well. I'm planning to make some other videos with more complex expression examples in the future, but I wanted to create this video to give beginners a foundation to start from. I've actually split this video into two parts to make it easier to digest. Expressions in Nuke are really powerful. They allow us to reference information from different sources all over our script. We can use them to manipulate or combine these sources of information. We can use them to check for certain conditions in our script and change the behavior of nodes based on whether that condition is true or not. They allow us to create master controls that can change many nodes at once from a single set of knobs. And we can use them to create complex procedural animation without setting a single keyframe. Expressions can look really complicated, especially to beginners, but most expressions are simple once you understand what they're doing. Expressions in Nuke are written using a scripting language called TCL or Tickle, but you don't need to know any coding to be able to get started. In this video, I'm going to run through some of the really simple expression concepts that I use all the time in my work. Just using these expressions as they are can help you work more efficiently. But once you start seeing what is happening, you can start combining these ideas to build much more powerful tools. So let's dive into expressions in Nuke. The most basic use of an expression is to reference data from one part of your script and use it somewhere else. Let's take a look at this grade node. In this example, we want to link the multiply value to the white point slider. Every knob in every node that we create in Nuke has a unique name. This name is a combination of the node name up here and the knob name. The knob name isn't always the same as the label, which is the text displayed next to the knob. We can see the name of the knob by hovering our cursor over the knob for a second to see the little yellow name pop up. In this case, the white point slider is actually called white point. But gain is called white and offset is called add, so it's always worth checking. Let's create an expression in the multiply knob to link it to the white point value. We can create an expression in a knob several ways. We can click on the animation menu that is next to most knobs and choose Edit Expression. We can also get this option by right-clicking on the value. This is useful if the knob doesn't have an animation menu, like these checkboxes. We can also click on the knob value as though we're going to type something in, and then hit the equals key on the keyboard. Whichever way we get to it, we will see this expression box. This is where we will enter our expression. We want the multiply value to reference the value of the white point slider, so we simply enter the name of the knob, white point. These knob names are case sensitive and don't have spaces in, so you need to make sure you type it correctly. You can tell if you've entered a valid expression because the result will display below. If anything is wrong with your expression, you will see an error message instead. Once we have created the expression and closed the dialog box, several things happen. Firstly, you can see that the knob that contains the expression now has a pale blue color. Secondly, we now see the expression when we hover our cursor over the knob. And thirdly, we see a small green circle with an E inside now shows up in the bottom right corner of our node to indicate that it contains an expression. With this expression set, we can now see that the multiply knob now matches whatever value we set in the white point slider and updates automatically. So we've created our first expression with just one word. If we want to remove an expression from a knob, the easiest way is to right-click on the knob and choose No Animation. This will remove the expression and set the knob to whatever the value the expression was currently setting for it. We could also choose Set to Default, which will remove the expression and return the knob to its default value. In this case, we're connecting two knobs within the same node, but we can also reference values from other nodes in our script. Let's create two blur nodes. You can see that they have unique node names, blur1 and blur2. We want to link the size of the blur in blur2 so that it always matches blur1. Let's open the Edit Expression dialog box for the size knob in blur2. Now, instead of just adding the name of the knob, which is size, we also need to include the name of the node that we want to reference, which is blur1. So we type blur1.size. We can see that this creates the little green circle and the blue shading like before, and it also creates a green line connecting the nodes. This line shows that there is an expression link between the nodes, and the arrow on the line shows the direction that the data is flowing between them. If you don't see the green line, you can go to the Edit menu and choose Expression Arrows to show or hide them, but it's easier to just use the keyboard shortcut Alt or Option plus E. Now, when we change the value of the blur size in Blur 1, the value in Blur 2 matches automatically. If we copy and paste Blur 2, we see that Blur 3 is already linked to Blur 1. If we select both Blur 1 and Blur 2 and copy and paste them, you'll see that Nuke keeps the relationship between the two. Blur 4 is linked to Blur 3. If we open the expression in Blur 4, you can see that Nuke has automatically updated the expression so that it links to the new node that we just created. This is useful when you copy and paste setups, and even works when you copy and paste between scripts. This expression can be read kind of like a file path. We can imagine that the node name is the top level file directory, and then we drill down into our hierarchy of folder levels that are separated by each dot. And we can actually go deeper than the knob name that's size. Let's create a fifth blur node, Blur 5. If we click the 2 next to the size knob, we can split this knob into separate width and height controls. This allows us to blur the image horizontally and vertically separately. If we open the Edit Expression dialog box for the height property and look at the title bar of the box, we can see the name of the knob that we are adding the expression to, blur5.size.h. The h is now referencing this specific control for the blur height. This is called the child value of the size knob. We could simply add a w to this expression to link the height size to the width size in the same node, so that if we increase the width, we increase the height the same. But we could also connect the height value to the height value of blur 1 with blur1.size.h. Now the vertical blur in Blur 5 is being controlled by Blur 1, but the width isn't. Nuke is reasonably smart at dealing with these child values for us and returning the most obvious value without us having to think about them. Let's set up 2 transform nodes for an example. If I open the expressions for the translate value in Transform 2 from the animation menu, I can edit the expressions for x and y in the same window. If I add transform1.translate to each one, and then change the values in Transform 1, you can see that Nuke is smart enough to realize that I probably want the translate.x value to map to the x value in Transform 2, and the translate.y value to link to the y. If I was to explicitly add a .x to the expression in the y knob, you can see that it now forces Nuke to look at the x child value in Transform 1. You'll notice that if I want to reference a knob within the same node, I don't have to include the node name. And if I'm referencing a child value of the same knob, I don't even need to include the name of the knob. This is because expressions reference data in a relative way. This means that if you don't explicitly define a full path to a variable, Nuke will look for it on the same level as where the expression is being evaluated. Let's use a grade node to explore this a little further. We can split out the multiply control to show the separate controls for each channel, red, green, blue, and alpha. These separate knobs now behave as the child values of the multiply knob and are called multiply.r, multiply.g, multiply.b, and multiply.a. Let's add an expression to the green knob. If we simply add r and nothing else, we will see that the green value will now link to the red multiply value. We didn't need to include the word multiply because the 2 knobs are on the same level relative to each other. Now let's split out the gain node above. If we hover over the gain knob, we can see that the knob name is actually white, so we need to add white and a dot before the r in the expression to link the green multiply knob to the red gain knob. By adding the word white, but not including the node name, we've told the expression to look up one level from where it is for a knob called white, and then look at the red child value. Now let's create a second grade node, grade 2, and split out the gain control here. Let's edit the expression one more time, and add grade 2 and a dot before the word white. You can see that we're telling the expression to go one level further up, which is outside of the node that it's in, to find a node called grade 2, and then drill down into grade 2 to find a property called white, and then look at the R value of that knob. So always remember, think about where the value that you want is relative to where you're adding the expression. Sometimes, in a more complex node, the actual name of the knob or the full address of it isn't obvious, or perhaps you just don't feel like typing. There are several ways to create an expression link without typing the full path to the knob. The first is dragging and dropping. With both nodes open in the Properties pane, hold down Control or the Command key and drag the knob value that you want to reference to the knob that you want to add the expression to. You can see that Nuke automatically creates the expression link for you. But if you look at the expression that is created, you can see that it is added parent to the front of the expression. This is Nuke being extra thorough. Usually, you don't need this parent unless you are starting to create groups or gizmos and need to reference things outside of the group that you are working in. And there are occasions in which this can cause problems, so if you aren't using it, just delete it. Sometimes though, you can't drag and drop a link. In a tracker node, for example, you can't drag a track to connect it to another knob. In this case, you can right-click on the track and choose Copy Links. Now, go to the knob you want to add the expression to, in this case a transform node, open the expression and paste. You can see that Nuke has pasted 2 links to 2 knobs, one for the track X and one for the track Y in curly braces. You can delete the braces and delete the link to the knob that isn't relevant. Let's look at the expression that we have left. It starts as we would expect, with the name of the node, tracker1. Then we have .tracks. This refers to the list of trackers inside tracker1. Then there is .1 to reference the first tracker in the list, and then .track_x to give us the X value of that tracker. There is no way that we could have known that this was how the tracker was referenced if we hadn't looked it up before. So copying the link and pasting it gives us what we need to know. Being able to reference data from other sources is great, but sometimes we don't want exactly the same values as the original source, we just want a similar relationship to the numbers. Expressions allow us to modify the data in all kinds of ways before we use it. In most cases, this modification is some kind of mathematical operation. Let's go back to the blur node for a simple example. Maybe I want blur 2 to always be exactly half the size of blur 1. I can enter the expression blur1.size and then divide that by 2. Now, whatever I set blur 1 to, blur 2 will always be half. Here's another quick example. I can create an expression in transform 3 that combines the transformation of 2 other transform nodes, transform 1 and transform 2. To do this, we simply enter transform1.translate plus transform2.translate. Now, if we move transform 1 20 pixels to the right and transform 2 10 pixels to the right, transform 3 has the result of 30. And this works for negative values too. If transform 1 goes 20 pixels to the right and transform 2 goes 20 pixels to the left, transform 3 stays at 0. We could also set transform 3 to an average of transform 1 and transform 2 by placing the previous expression in brackets and then dividing that result by 2. Now, the addition happens first, and then we halve that result to get the average. In this video, we covered how to reference the data from one knob and link it to another, whether that knob was in the same node or in a different node entirely. We also looked at how to find the name of a knob if it isn't obvious, and how to create a link without having to type anything at all. We saw how we can reference more granular properties of a knob with its child values, and we applied some basic maths to the data that we were referencing so that we could modify it. In part 2 of this introduction to expressions, I will show you how we can not only reference data from different nodes, but how we can reference it from different points in time as well. I'll also show you how we can use time as a variable to create automatic animations. Then we will look at if statements, which will allow us to change the results of our expressions depending on the conditions that we set. And we will combine these if statements with the $GUI variable to work faster with heavier nodes. And we will look at combining expressions with the text node, which will help us display what is happening in our script. I hope you enjoyed this video and it gave you a good starting point to start playing with expressions. If you did learn something, please hit like and subscribe to my channel so you can watch part 2 as soon as I post it. And if you have any examples of simple expressions that you use every day in your comps, please let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.